Hello, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. And welcome to our today's webinar about AI-powered modernization for OpenEdge applications using the SmartComponent Library. I'm Mike Fechner from Consultingwerk. Welcome and thanks for your interest in this topic. AI-powered modernization. First, at the beginning of the session, I think I have to praise to the gods of artificial intelligence. Yesterday, around this time of the day, Anthropic had a 2-hour major incident, which actually made it almost impossible to do anything with Claude Code. So it works much better today. That's unfortunately out of my control. And after that, I think I have to apologize to all the customers that we've done modernization of OpenEdge applications before sometime during the second half of 2025, because that was really the point in time where AI was ready and could be used with OpenEdge to do these kind of modernization efforts much faster. In the past, it was like finding patterns in legacy applications and then spending hours, if not a couple of days, to write an application basically that takes existing AVL code from one specific pattern and applies it to a modernized pattern and hope to make modernization a less manual effort. And all that is now basically history. AI is there and is much better at interpreting existing code and with rules and tools, which I'm going to discuss in this session. AI knows how to write modern OpenEdge applications that actually do work. I'm writing lots of OpenEdge code myself as well, still. And if I look back at the last couple of weeks, I would guess that at least 90, if not 90% of the code that I have written, produced, whatever word you want to use, have been actually written by AI. Last couple of weeks, almost exclusively by Claude Code. Before that, a lot by Windsurf. So I've made that switch a couple of weeks ago. Just felt right. And I don't know how to really quantify that, whether I look at lines of code or features or whatever. It's really when I look at existing code and I might look for really small improvement or small issue that I'm fixing. And while doing the analysis upfront, the solution jumps at me, and then I probably still do it myself. But with everything else, I've gotten pretty lazy and write detailed instructions for the AI to do the work for me. Mike Fechner, 35 years of experience with writing Progress applications, and might be that after 35 years that comes to an end because now the AI is doing that job for me. I started with version 5, mostly version 6. 5 was just a very short time. Now up to OpenEdge 12 or 13 actually. And I like to spend my time with software architecture, object design, more and more web technologies, and the last year especially a lot of AI stuff. We're at Consultingwerk. We support our customers during modernization of OpenEdge applications. So typically they're legacy applications grown over 20, 30, sometimes 40 years, with lots of domain knowledge implemented in them, domain functionality. We support our customers with our technical expertise. We are having a footprint on not the whole planet, but all over Europe, in North America, with customers in South Africa and Australia. And we provide consulting service, but also tools like the SmartComponent Library. So the SmartComponent Library is our framework. We are not just providing the SmartComponent Library since AI is there. We actually started around about 20 years working on the SmartComponent Library 20 years ago. First version was actually released 18 years ago. And we refer to that as a full stack framework. Full stack framework, meaning all components of an application architecture, back-end, front-end, tools, etc., that are needed to implement new applications, but is also designed to integrate with existing applications and provide support for step-by-step modernization of existing OpenEdge applications. The backend of the framework is a key component. Over time, it has shown that the backend is flexible enough to adapt to various front ends or front-end-less use cases. The framework has been designed from the beginning as an object-oriented framework. So that was actually the start of the development on the framework, was when Progress provided to us developers the ability to write object-oriented applications. We have a lot of functionality, foundational functionality in the framework that extends the OO capabilities of the ABL. And then we have a lot of framework features on top of that for architecture, but also more relevant to the users, authentication, localization, menus, workflows, referential integrity, a lot of functionality there. One thing that many of our customers really rely on since a couple of years is we believe that with the SmartComponent Library, we provide both the easiest way to implement RESTful interfaces for ABL applications, but also the most flexible one. So we don't believe that we are making it easy, and for that taking compromises in what you can do with it. With different front-end options, 20 years ago, we started with the .NET desktop UI. Nowadays, most of our customers that are doing new projects are using our web front-end based on the Angular framework. And we have components for mobile applications. Also, we don't use it that much. We just don't have that many use cases that our customers are working on for mobile applications. When we provide the framework to our customers, the customers receive the full source code. And that's not just traditionally a couple of years back, that was just kind of like the easiest alternative to any escrow agreement or whatever. Because when we deliver the source code of the product to our customers, there's no need to put it in somebody else's safe in case something would happen to us. Now with AI and AI coding assistance, the fact that our customers have access to our source code means even if they're still at the beginning of a legacy modernization, they receive from us 6,000 classes plus minus of a modern application and all architectural components of that. And AI coding assistants are very good at looking at how we implemented the SmartComponent Library and applying those patterns then to our customers when they're writing their applications using the SmartComponent Library. And that happens as learning while you're using the AI coding assistant. That does not require any specialized models or training any other models or whatever. Training our own AI models is something that we haven't even considered yet. We are using the state-of-the-art, say, mainframe models for what we do. Yeah, our experience with those is just positive. With the development of the framework, we always try to be ahead of what our customers need. And that doesn't mean that no customer ever comes to us and says, hey, we have a requirement that would be an enhancement request. But we always try to be having a roadmap that's ahead of the majority of the needs. From the beginning, customization and extensibility was a key design principle. I almost would be disappointed if we ever run into any customer where we would be implementing the framework without any customization. The needs are always different, so I definitely consider that a very, very strong point, that customization and extensibility is a core design principle. DevOps is also quite expensive as well, but quite important. We do provide templates for build, test, and deploy scripts to our customers, including managing database schema, database data, and stuff like that. Unit testing. We use a lot of that in our own development, in our own deployment, and that has been the foundation for what our customers are doing. We always support, a number of OpenEdge releases in parallel. We kind of still, we don't get away from 11.7, but it's mainly because, it's easier for us just to keep the final deployment and build environments on 11.7 than upgrading that to 12.2. We just didn't find the time to do that. But officially, we support the framework right now on 12.2, 12.8, and 13.0. We will keep 12.2 and 12.8 under formal support for the Smart Component Library for as long as they're long-term supported by Progress Software. 13.0 will probably be fading out pretty soon after 13.1 has been released by us. So we follow a similar version support strategy as Progress does. So, core component of the framework is the application backend. The backend is designed for PaaS-OE, the Progress application server. You can still use most of the backend features with the classic app server if you're in 11.7, but luckily most of our customers have moved to 12. The desktop GUI application actually also works without the app server. Batch processing works without the app server, but the design principles are to support the PaaS-OE with whatever we do. You can deploy the backend wherever you can deploy PaaS-OE to, so on your own physical servers, your own virtual servers. You can put it into any cloud where Progress supports PaaS-OE. You can put it into a Docker Kubernetes cluster, so whatever you want. We support, optionally support all the more advanced database or security features like multi-tenancy or encryption or whatever. But we do also have alternatives for that. I mean, if you need to implement a multi-company setup without multi-tenancy, then of course the framework supports you in building queries with a company key based on indexed field in a database type. We provide various front-end options, either our own ones or with partners that provide front ends. So we started the Smart Component Library when Progress released OpenEdge GUI 4.net, or a little bit earlier, as the easiest way to build GUI 4.net applications. And I think that still is true. We are maintaining since the release of Angular 2 an Angular-based framework, currently I believe on Angular version 21, with a similar programming model, with customers that are using the framework to build headless applications without any classic front end. So it might be just based on REST interfaces or batch processing, and with Build One and Rapid Cloud Development with two partners that built their own frameworks, more front-end focused, and it's possible to use the Smart Component Library as a backend behind Build One or Rapid Cloud. Yeah, API development, I mentioned that a bit earlier. So that has become, not just for us, but in the whole industry, a standard protocol for application integration and flexibility. So we provide a very simple and very flexible way of implementing RESTful service for or with OpenEdge, and that allows us to build either new functionality straight away as RESTful service or provide existing legacy functionality as a RESTful service. We provide an Open API Swagger documentation straight out of the box. I'm going to be using that in one of the demos later. Yeah, we don't need any deployment or web applications or WAR files or whatever. We just put some annotations in the code, and that declares at runtime the API. That allows us to do an API first design. So we implement services based on an Open API specification. So if a customer has a requirement to integrate with another application, and therefore might have to implement a certain set of services based on a Swagger file that has been provided by the business partner and not by your own design. So, but let's start looking at what we do with the AI assistance in terms of modernization. I'm going to start with a couple of screenshots from an actual project that we finished. Was it January, February this year? We have the application started as a GUI, Progress GUI legacy application, a mix of version 8 ADM1, version 9 ADM2, and some GUI for .NET. So a little bit of everything, sometimes even mixed in the single screen. It's a customer in Germany, so the database model and all identifiers and comments in the code are in German. The demand was to migrate at least parts of that into a web browser. And so we used the Angular Web UI of the SmartComponent Library. We, as the ones that are maintaining the application, we also have the demand to use this effort as finally a way to deduplicate business logic. Some business rules have been implemented in multiple places. We want to get rid of that. And this whole thing was happening along a requirement for some changes to rather central database tables in the application. In particular, we had historically the address fields for the customer straight in the customer record, but now there was a demand to support multiple addresses for a single customer. Since that is used very centrally, that was kind of like a major refactoring by its own. That's one screenshot of a ADM. I think that was one of the ADM1 screens here. And now the screens migrated into the web browser, Angular web application, stylable, responsive, all the aspects that you're expecting of a modern web application these days. Another screen you see on the left, a GUI for .NET based pop-up dialog for creating a new customer, and on the right-hand side then a browser dialog, a little bit more flat and new styling. And while doing that, we applied most of the techniques that I'm going to talk about now. So first, I mean, all this is based on Gen AI, generative AI. So AI that's basically capable of generating mostly text documents, and application source code is typically text. And that's something that we really started utilizing more or less a year ago, spring last year. Before that, we've been using Windsurf as an editor that gave us quite fancy code completion while typing. But around that time, these tools really turned into coding agents, coding assistants, or today more frequently referred to as co-workers, or like the junior programmer that does all the work for you following your specifications. It's great at interpreting existing code, and it helps a lot with transitioning to a new application architecture. It helps with things like separation of UI and backend code and refactoring of source code. And I think that separation of UI and backend and refactoring into centralized business object, I mean, that has been the hard work in modernizing OpenEdge applications since a long time. And what is based on as well, these coding assistants, they're really great in understanding what existing code does. And they're using various techniques for that. I mean, they just understand text, like they understand the questions that you ask them, or they can give you a digest of a newsletter article or even a whole book. Nothing different with source code. And it is actually, if you look at the complexity for the large language models, just understanding source code and telling you what it does, or turning that into kind of like a reverse engineering of the requirements of that program, that is for an AI a rather trivial task. Generating new code is actually much more complex. And I think it also helps that ABL programs are typically very verbose. And one thing, just to make that clear, since a couple of months, I personally do not feel that the fact that with the ABL we're using kind of a niche product or niche language, that isn't really any constraint anymore. That might have been a year and a half ago when you tried to get a working for each from ChatGPT. That probably was still returning you a mix of Fortran and some real ABL or whatever, a lot of hallucinations. But especially with the releases of the large language models from around end of last year, beginning of this year, they know enough about ABL to really produce meaningful code. And then, as I said earlier, if they then have the chance to look at our code and your legacy application, that means there are thousands, if not 10,000s of working ABL samples that they can learn from and use when generating new or modified code. So that's what we do with refactoring. I mean, we build new programs typically. We usually don't refactor within the existing code. We can do that too, but most of the time we're also switching from procedural code to class-based code because, well, we just believe that class-based code is more robust and is a coding style of the future. And if you touch code, then that would just make a lot of sense. So we use the existing source code as part of the requirements because I believe, or I don't think I've ever met a customer that has a complete set of written out specifications of what his ERP or his financial or his logistics application is meant to do. It's the truth is just in the source code. So understanding that at speed and at scale is really the foundation for that. And then we have new patterns, new APIs, a new architecture that we somehow need to explain to the AI coding agents. The existing code of the framework is part of that, but we also just document that. And the nice thing is this documentation all happens in natural language or human language. It's a bit like writing a documentation for our customers or a junior programmer on how to do something, and the AI is able to follow that. There's a certain degree of optimizing that because if you get too verbose with your descriptions, then the AIs use too many tokens and then it's slower, more expensive, or they might have to throw away a little bit of the context because there are limits to the context. But in essence, it's all natural language. That allows us to separate UI and business logic, separate domain logic from application or framework logic. And through the explanation of what code does, AI can actually also help verifying whether two blocks of code really do the same stuff and therefore are a duplicate and should be eliminated, or one of them should be eliminated. Then a lot of people hear this term of vibe coding. So this, you just explain what an application should do, and then it just builds something, and suddenly you have an app on your mobile phone and you have no idea how it has been built. So this classic vibe coding, I think, is quite dangerous because most of the OpenEdge applications that we're working on now are around for 20, 30, 40 years, and probably should still be around in a couple of years, so maybe 10 years or whatever. So we need to have a lot of control over what code is generated. We need to make sure that the code remains maintainable. Even though maintenance gets easier with AI, much easier with AI, we still need to be able to control what functionality gets implemented where and how and how big you make your components and all these kind of things that are more relevant to an architect than the actual implementation of a method. Applications might need to adhere to standards, security rules. One thing that if you just let AI do what AI thinks is best, you ask it the same question or give it the same instruction today and tomorrow, and it will never return exactly the same code. It might be going in a completely different direction. So and all these are things that if you want to maintain an application for long, are really a no-go. And in discussion forums, the kind of like the counter hype to vibe coding has become the vibe slot. So the vibe slop, so basically the fact that a lot of the code, the applications that have been vibe coded are straight away garbage. You can use them for a while, but when you want to make changes to them, you throw them away. There might be use cases where that's acceptable, but I don't think that a whole ERP system is something where you say, hey, we need a major change next week. We just vibe code it again and don't care whether we could reuse what we did yesterday. And part of that is, part of the solution to that problem is, in my belief, a developer framework. A developer framework defines a robust and flexible framework architecture and provides all the building blocks for that. And that includes the reference implementation and documentation. Frameworks provide tools that support developers during all phases of the development lifecycle. The SmartComponent Library, especially, and what we do is all based on deep experience with writing and maintaining AVL legacy applications. Peter Judge, who's on this call here, we refer to him as a junior because he only has. Peter, do you have this 30 already full? So we have colleagues in the team that know AVL for 30 plus years and know how applications have been built in the past. And I believe that that's foundational to know how to migrate them to something new. And yeah, in the last 12 months, we've worked towards the definition or building a lot of AI tooling that lead to an AI-based modernization process. So, and how it's applied in practice? Well, we work with one of the mainstream coding agents. I'll have a slide on that topic later. We provide rules and guidelines. There's these various configuration files that you can provide. Luckily, there's a lot of standardization with these files happening. So a skill for Windsurf is a skill for Copilot, is a skill for Claude Code. There's no real difference anymore. The way agents are supported is still a little bit different. And all these files are typically a mix of natural language. So normal English, maybe German, or any other language that's understood by the AIs. And sample code and stuff like that. Everything that's relevant to understanding a pattern or a certain task. Then we provide MCP servers for special tasks during application building and refactoring. With the MCP servers, we are integrating knowledge into the process, but also our classic and proven code generators. And with that, we also solve the problem that a complex component, if you give the AI too much rope to code it, would or might potentially look slightly different today than it did yesterday. So it's basically closing the gap between non-deterministic and deterministic processes. And one thing which I believe is very important is to allow different models in how you execute then modernization with AI and basically in how much the developer is in the loop or in control on the driver's seat, or how much automation you want. The tools that we use, traditionally Windsurf. We are Windsurf users since 2 years now here. Just today, Windsurf finally integrated Devin. Devin is from the same company, Cognition, their cloud-based framework for cloud-based agents, and you can control and use them straight out of the Windsurf IDE now. Since a couple of weeks, I've almost completely switched to Claude Code. It's hard to say whether Claude Code is really better than Windsurf and Code it generates. It feels better, and it feels more natural to give it larger tasks, longer tasks, so where tasks could run for half an hour, an hour to completion. With customers that use or prefer to use VS Code or Copilot, and that's typically customers that maybe from their IT department are being provided with the relevant Microsoft licenses. With one customer where we're working with anti-gravity in Germany, I haven't spent a lot of time with that, but anti-gravity is basically a port of Windsurf from a couple of months ago, and then Google started integrating its own cloud-based coding agents into that. And every now and then I'm playing with Mistral code just to give the European alternative between all the big American AI players a chance, and it's also looking quite promising. And they all have the same concepts of skills and rules and MCP servers and whatsoever. So the difference is really low. Like I said in the beginning, we typically use the big or mainstream LLMs. Claude Sonnet, Claude Opus, or from OpenAI, the GPT models. And they all have made, so both OpenAI and Claude, a huge step forwards in code generation at the end of last year, beginning of this year. Just as an example, last week or the week before, because I was bored in the evening at the couch, I just used Claude to put together requirements for regex parser. And then I said, Claude, okay, now that you've put together requirements for regex parser that does pattern matching and search and replace, go on and implement it along with a serious amount of unit tests. And half an hour later, I had 30 plus unit tests and the implementation. I ran the unit tests, 5 of them failed. And all I had to do is I had to provide the unit test error messages in a follow-up prompt to Claude Code. And 2 or 3 minutes later, it had fixed the unit tests. And yeah, and since then we have a regex parser in ABL in the framework that I never thought we'd ever have, because I thought, well, a human developer would probably take a month to build something. So let's look at some refactoring demos, and this is basically my historic one. That's one thing which for me was kind of like eye-opening mid last year. I've used that in previous webinars, so I'm gonna skim over the video recording quite quickly. It's based on actual code or a coding style in a customer's application. Well, I've changed it so that I can use it here. And it's TTY UI code, and their application, the validation typically happens in a transaction block. They update the record, and then they have these 2 while blocks with validation. While that validation is not successful, you stick within the block for that. First time that I've seen that specific pattern. If I would have had to do that with our classic approaches with ProPass, blah, 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 I would have estimated that it takes us 2 days to write a parser that could convert that into validation in our business entities. With AI, that is now much easier, and there I provided all the instructions in a Jira ticket. It just makes it a little bit easier to write the prompt and edit it and think about it and start it then the next day. And here was still very verbose, very detailed. A lot of the things which are here now individual instructions have in the meantime become skills. And with skills, the AI coding agent can decide itself if it encounters a certain situation to apply rules from a certain skills. And you have kind of like proven reusable routines that for certain aspects. But when we run this code, or this video, the only prompt that I put in there is I tell, well, implement that Jira ticket. Look at Jira ticket MISC 104. MISC is our Jira project that I took use for demos like that. And the coding agent fetches the Jira ticket and then uses that as the actual prompt. Then it looks at the program that we're looking at, reads it, interprets it, and then starts with the various steps. And based on the requirements, for instance, we set that error messages, which are now the text in the future, we want them localizable. So it runs an MCP server tool which extracts the error messages from the source code and loads them into our framework database. The tool returns the message reference, it's a number and a message group. And based on that, when we look at the refactored code, it can now reference these messages. The requirements also said that the frame-based input needs to be replaced into input based on a REST object, because we wanted to turn that into a RESTful services. So for the input fields, the AI generated in progress class representing the input. Then it generated this business task that's for us a class with RESTful input with assignments to the fields based on the input parameter. And I instructed that the database access should not be using direct access to the database tables. The prompt included, well, makes that code that uses our object relational wrapper. We refer to these objects as a dataset model, so that is a set of classes that's generated for business entities. And through those components, we preferably do all our database access. So this code has now been extracted from the UI portion of it, and an interface was provided to this code that can be used as a RESTful service. And the next thing is, well, we added localization through raising error message from the message dictionary, and we're using our open wrapper to use business entities, so that we can now start moving all the validation out of the actual process programs into the business entity as a central validation place for a certain database table. And really the cool thing is, once you know how to deal with the individual patterns for the building blocks, you have really a very high degree in flexibility. The coding agents, they are really great at applying those rules to similar code, but it's not like really parsing letter by letter by letter yourself. It's you utilize the interpretation of the code in those coding agents. So that was then part of the solution here was already plugging in an MCP server into the coding agents. An MCP server for us here is just a way how we make the coding agent able to call into PaaS-OE. Our MCP servers are based on .NET Core. We use MCP servers before Progress provided the MCP server for OpenEdge. They're really a very, very important building block for us here. I meant to count the number of MCP server methods that we have in the framework now. Would say around 40 for key aspects of that. And with all that, we provide either knowledge or deterministic code generators, or access to our UI repository database that we can write in a controlled way data into an OpenEdge database, which is describing UIs. And yeah, especially for writing business entities, and that's what I'm going to do in the next demo, or generating them. This is really the way how we can really rely on the code generators that we have in the product since a while. We use AI also to generate code. So it's not only that we have our own code generators, but for certain key areas, for certain skeletons where we know something needs to have a certain structure, we start with our generators and then we use AI to build the code within. Good. So now let's briefly look at this example. Before I go into this example, I'm going to start another. I actually start with the third demo, because I just want to show you that I'm starting with a process which actually takes a while. So this is now Claude Code, doing this outside of Windsurf, but that's not relevant. And I'm copying a prompt in here. So I'm telling it to analyze an ADM2 window. And I could stop the prompt here, and then a lot of defaults which are defined in skills would apply. But I add to the prompt, well, you know, normally you would be reusing the existing order business entity, the existing order line business, and the existing customer business entity. I don't want that. So I want new business entities in this demo Smart Components webinar, and I'm gonna add a to folder here, there, package, and we're gonna verify that this folder isn't there yet. So in my Smart Components demo folder, there is already the Smart Components demo webinar, but not the one with the two. So that, and for the domain UI objects, use the prefix demo2 on top of the naming patterns from the skill. So the skill provides rules for longer flow, and it's going to be busy with this for 2 or 3 minutes. But through the prompt, I can still influence what is being happening. And I'll get back to that in a bit. So now on this, it's also a sample that I've been using for years. We have an update editing screen, typical TTY data entry pattern, and I want to harvest those validation rules and now turn that into RESTful services. So let's start with that, and I'm going to use Windsurf for that now. Here's the original procedure and the actual validation codes that I care about. Is this here? So we verify that the name is not empty, and that the sales rep is valid, and that the country is valid. And when the user updates country and sales rep, we return the actual exact spelling of the names back to the caller. Typical lookup functionality there. So also here, I'm checking that I do not have a package that I'm going to refer to now. So that is almost empty. I could delete that as well. Make it really empty. So I'm going to set the prompt now in Windsurf. Here in the chat panel, Windsurf now has a new version since yesterday or today, a new agent mode where the direct editing of the source code completely goes out of the picture. Since well, it's only there since yesterday, I'm going to stick to the classic way. And I'm going to instruct it just to generate a business entity. And for those that have seen demos of SmartComponent in the past, that's something which I could also be doing using a graphical designer with drag and drop, and then I provide the name of the package there and do that, or through a prompt. And the nice thing is with a prompt, I can also automate that. I could provide a list of business entities in a prompt, in a text file, in a Jira ticket. I could tell the coding agent to do a database query that returns all the tables and run it from there. So the flexibility of plugging that into a complete process is actually extremely high. So I wanted to create a business entity with that name in that package for the customer table, and additionally add the rep name and the country name fields as description fields there. And I see while doing that, it does certain MCP server calls. And one of them is the instruction to create a business it first checks whether there's already one, then it creates a business entity. So it basically translates my prompt into relevant parameters to that progress procedure. It's a progress procedure on the app server. We could actually be looking at that. Different hyphen there. And there we see that we have a procedure that has a business entity name parameter, a package, a database table name, and an additional fields parameter, and something for authentication, which I'm not going to go into right now. And that has now used our legacy generators. It created a business entity together with a lot of friends, including the data access object and the database access object. We do then see code that maps temp table fields, including those from the additional tables, to fields of the business entity. Business entities are built around data sets and temp tables and so on, following the ideas of the OpenEdge reference architecture. Good. So now I'm going to tell Windsurf to tell me what's happening in the validation of that.p file. And this explains stuff. If you need documentation for existing code, you could just ask these explain or document questions, and it will produce that nicely here in the output of the coding agent, but you could also ask it to upload it to a Confluence page. Why not do that spontaneously? The easiest way to upload it to a Confluence page is actually to create, I could drag the browser window over, a placeholder page somewhere. I think I'm going to go into my personal space and I just create an empty page. And publish that. And it just takes the link of that page. And I say, that's nice. Please update Confluence page with that. And that way, if you're doing first like an analysis of what do we have, and you want to rebuild documentation about the application that you didn't have in the past, you can use this to populate it in almost any other wiki. The typical subject is probably Confluence for more the enterprise things, or Notion for the cool hip kids. But when I now reload the Confluence page, it has documented me all of that here in a nice way. And yeah, So I just used the empty thing because I need to tell somehow which conference page to add, but I could now do a follow-up prompt and just say, hey, do me something in a subpage. So never tried that, but not seeing any reason why that shouldn't just work. So it's creating a page. It created a hello world page somewhere. If I find my browser window, then there's a hello world page underneath that page that we had before. So good. So, but back to what I was about. So I asked it for what are the rules, and what I could now do is I could now start looking at this and what is still relevant code. I mean, if some of these business rules are no longer needed, it might be something that we as the developers or architects have to tell. But actually what I'm telling is, well, refactor the validation logic found in that update editing block into the validator method of that business entity that I just created. I tried to do exactly the same stuff 3 weeks ago for a demo at the UK PAC event, and it failed miserable. And it failed miserable because there I thought, hey, I can type this while I'm talking equally well, and I did not copy and paste it from a script, and I was just missing a space here. And to my huge surprise, normally typos and all that stuff are absolutely not relevant. The AI understands it regardless. But there, probably because the word method then became part of the method name, it was searching the framework like crazy for a validated data method pattern. So instead of a validated data space method. So sometimes the AI is really surprisingly naive, but most of the time it's surprisingly good at doing what you think about even without saying that. So say, hey, I want the validation logic in that business entity. So there's still an empty validated data block here. And now it's looking at it in Windsurf, it's diving, swimming. That's actually the one thing where all these coding agents are different in the terms that they use to keep you entertained. So for Windsurf, it's all these water thingy. And it's checking now for the validation rules that have been there, but also here I want to reuse existing business entities. And in our framework database, it has found out there is no dataset model available there. So that means the access to the sales rep table here cannot be rewritten. So if I now look at the code, it's not yet done, it's still working. When there are compile errors, it reads them itself and tries to fix them. But we see the access to the sales rep table remains like that. And the access to the country is now using our own ORM wrapper. One of the compile errors is already gone. So here you see it has these errors and it's trying to outfix them. Just like a human developer, you write code, it doesn't compile, you try better. No, this time it doesn't like it.
Maybe it just got stuck in one of the other worker processes, Mike. Manual recompile. Yeah.
Or it's CV's code language, so which isn't happy because the code looks legit. No,
Yeah.
it is not. Okay. Okay. So time for another rule to pay double attention to that. And probably in the other case, exactly the same issue. Yeah, at least it's consistent. Okay, good. So that now compiles. And now if I go back to the prompt, I can now invoke a Windsurf workflow. That's a series of steps it should do within parameter. I want to add a RESTful annotation to that. So there are already some annotation. I'm going to add more to that. Such a workflow in Windsurf is a series of steps. You can look at the workflow. And it says, well, add the following two annotations to the class just before the class statement itself. Then update the rest address, the address of the annotation with what's being provided as a parameter. Then replace custom in the field with the name of the primary field of the temp table. So here it already needs to take a break and look at the code, the other code in that class, because that has influence on what we're doing, and so on and so on. And then in the end, it says, well, the business needs to implement an interface and then delete a cache file to, and then this REST info point is actually going to be deployed. This workflow was one of my first ones. I wrote it manually. Nowadays, I wouldn't do that anymore. Nowadays, I actually instruct the coding agent to create the workflow for me, which also has a benefit that the coding agent, while working the workflow, tries to do the stuff that you want from it, and in the workflow it just has those instructions which will lead to the desired result rather than all my try and error. But anyway, so let's do that and see what it does. It shows me all of his design decisions. So the primary key field custom, the first 5 fields which are referenced there to go into one of the annotations are those first five fields. They appear here in that annotation. The key field is there. It has added the interface as instructed by the workflow. And it has deleted this caching file. So I can verify that this caching file is not there. So there's no file with an R anywhere nearby. So then I just trim my pass-e and navigate to the Swagger page. And the first time that I open the Swagger page for this pass-e, the Swagger page is going to be regenerated. What did I use as the customer demo? So, and now we see here the endpoints that have been refactored. And what I could check now is that when I do the patch method to update individual fields of a given record, and the easiest just to try what happens if I leave the name field empty and run that. Then I see the error message, please enter customer name. And that is the message that has been returned by the first validation rule taken from the update editing. And really the cool thing is this scales pretty well to really complex business logic, because at the end of the day, what are we doing? We're looking at field values, we're accessing records, we decide whether it's good or whether we return an error message. So if we put that down into certain patterns, then it is all not that complex. So those are the prompts that we used. It's actually a video in case the gods of AI would have had a bad day. I did the RESTful annotations, and now let's look at a GUI sample. So this is an 18.2 application that I provided as a demo for today. Yes, I had to remember how to build 18.2 applications, but one of these things that are hard to forget. We do have a viewer on the top, a toolbar, a browser on the left, then we have a tab folder. On the first page, there's one viewer. On the second page, there's a grid and another viewer. I want to turn that into an Angular web application. I want to use our front-end components and want to store the UI layout in our UI repository database. In the program, there's a mix of SDO-based data access and direct database access. And for certain UI components and lookups is always like the easy example, because every application has some form of lookups. We want to replace them with the actual lookup component in our framework. And here in these 18.2 smart viewers, the lookups are just like one fill-in, a button, and another fill-in with a description field, etc. And I want to let the human take control over all design decisions. So that's the prompt that I put into the chat before I started that other demo. I'm going to return to Claude now, and it has returned me lots of information, and it was using many steps. It did read the smart window program. It did read 7 reference programs there. It did use various tools, calls into our framework database, whatever. And then it has provided me an analysis, basically a design proposal for how to turn that into a new application as a JIRA ticket. So he created me this new JIRA ticket, MIST 138. And my colleagues will hate me for that, but since a couple of weeks, most of my JIRA tickets are written by AI as well. I'm using Claude Cowork a lot for that. That makes writing JIRA tickets so much faster and more precise and stuff like that. So this is now really the design document for that. I've used JIRA here as my target for that, but the target could be everything. I could create a Word document on SharePoint because there's an MCP server for that. I could create text files in my code base, markdown files or whatever. I could put it into Notion, wherever. The AI has interfaces to all these tools, so it can write it anywhere. The one thing that I like about JIRA, better than writing markdown files in the code. A markdown file in the code is something that if two developers are analyzing documents in two different branches, you may run into merge conflicts because of that, and the JIRA tickets just outside the code base. But anyway, so, and this is now the instruction for, or the proposal for what it does. And based on a naming pattern that I've defined, it has turned w-order-entry.w. This naming pattern is just written in natural language in a skill, in this analysis skill. We write, this should be the name, and this demo2 is the prefix that I've given in the prompt. Then we see which are the smart objects contained in there, and the name of the original programs, the handle used in the program, and again the proposed names based on a naming pattern. So things like the toolbar and tab folder are reused, and the other are part of that implementation. So it has now also prefixed them with this demo2. It did check whether they're already there, because if they're not yet there, we need to create them. Then paging information, something about where they are placed, the linking, the folder pages, and it did actually happen by accident, but then it turned out to become a cool demo feature. I had a typo in one of the tab folder labels in the legacy application, order lines with 2 L's. And then I said, hey, Claude, during the analysis, look if any of the labels, the window title, field labels, and viewers have typos, and propose them as fixes. And since it's just a JIRA document, I could modify this, I could remove that. I'm in full control of this. Then I see which database tables are there. And here I'm actually going to take control because it says, okay, I have the order STO, that's one of these ADM2 smart objects, the order line STO, and there are direct accesses to some of these database tables. The analyzer says, well, if we're not reusing any of the existing business entities, and that was because in my prompt, I said, I do not want that. Without this second part of the prompt, it would have reused the existing business entities. So I'm in complete control. You can even go into more detail. You could say, you know, reuse all of the business entities except for this one. There we create a dedicated new one because this use case is different. You are in control. That's very important. So now I'm going to do that. I'm just going to go into the JIRA ticket and I edit that. And it creates me the order business entity in an order package. That's fine. I want the order lines business entity in a package order detail. I want the what? Not reused. Why didn't it do that? Did I accidentally point at another one? I think I irritated. It says all these exist, but this would be the place where I can provide different names for them. Down here it says not reused. Okay, so maybe I have to work a little bit more on this skill. This skill, to look into that one, is again one of these markdown documents, and that has been provided or generated through a series of prompts and daily discussion with Claude Code. So none of this was written by me. I provide instructions which attributes of the window are relevant, then where to find the included smart objects, etc., what to do with pages, and so on and so on. And when we work with a different source application, different framework, different coding style, different whatever. This analyzer skill is one of the things that we need to adjust to that. We need to explain the AI where to find the relevant information in the source program. Here we have the proposing for the names, where we say, well, we use Pascal case, have a type suffix instead of the 802 hyphenated prefix convention. So, and that's basically what provides the rules. I can change that. I could change it in this document, or I could just tell the coding agent to update the naming pattern for these kind of stuffs. So here's in the more details, so remove type prefix W, V, B, D, etc. Then it produces this document with the analysis, which then uploaded, proposed name for that, and so on and so on and so on. Here's the instruction, what's a typo check, then the database tables. If I look further now into the Jira ticket, it also looks at frames, and then something which is really cool for the main layout of the screen. In the SmartComponent Library, we can refer to templates with placeholder instances. These templates live in the repository. The AI agent can access that. Plus, we have, and that's mainly to be able to make it more meaningful for humans, we do also provide markdown files. And Markdown is really the compromise between nicely human readable and nicely consumable for the AI coding assistant. So this describes a template with a single data source grid viewer and a tab folder horizontal. That description doesn't make sense, but that's a mistake in our data. Then it provides an ASCII graphics of the layout that's being generated by the AI from our repository data. So we see we have a header viewer, we have a split container, we have a grid on the left, on the right-hand side we have a toolbar, tab folder with 2 pages with these objects. Then we have a description. This description here can also help the AI to make the decision what's the right thing. I can provide screenshots here in this document just to make this more meaningful for us, deciding whether it's the right template or not. So, and now it has matched the templates against the screen result and says, okay, well, the excellent fit is this template master detail form with a tab folder and a header viewer. It matches all criteria: header viewer on page 0, master grid left, tab folder to the right, master viewer page 1, and detail grid and viewer on page 2. Then the same without the header viewer, still a good match, but it's missing the header viewer. And well, then there would be a pretty bad fallback. And so, yeah, I could now take instruction and say, you know, your decision isn't good. I prefer different, either by updating this table, removing them, or then when I give the follow-up prompt to actually implement it, I would say, no, use a different template because your choice isn't really good. But this is all really based on the AI looking into this here and understanding that this call here and that call here lead into positioning of that smart object somewhere on the window. And with that, it's enabled to say, oh, I have a grid or a browser on the left-hand side, then I have a tab folder somewhere, and that matches the structure of the template. So what I then do, and I'm going to go into the slides now, also because it's getting late already. This is where I want to take control on the generic names in the Jira ticket, and then the follow-up prompt. And this follow-up prompt doesn't need to be a follow-up prompt. If I do it immediately, then I just refer to the ticket, because from previous conversations, the AI agent still knows, okay, I just created a ticket. And if the user refers to the ticket, it must be that one. If I do it tomorrow, because maybe somebody else has to approve my design and then I say code it, I would not say the ticket. I would say, okay, now we're going to do this based on ticket MISC 138. Or I could ask it to look for the ticket describing the design for a certain ADM2 window, because the AI can also search for Jira tickets quite nicely. So I do all the three things. And since a couple of weeks, the AIs want to do everything in parallel, unless you tell it. And here, well, we need to build it in a certain order. We first need to build the business entities. Then we build certain repository objects that reference the business entity. And then we can actually do the visual objects and at the end put it all together in a window. Then it's giving me the output while it's going. The process of creating that window based on what's in the Jira document takes 5 or 6 minutes. It's not rocket speed. If I would have a 4GL program that would be outputting all that code and creating the records in the repository and compiling that, it would be much faster, but by far not that flexible. But with 5 or 6 minutes, I'm still 10, 20, 50 times faster than what a human developer would take. So then it's creating the business entities, it's creating data sources, that's the registration of business entity in the repository, confirming me that that was actually the first skill, the creating the business entities is one skill. Then it's converting the viewers and the grids. That's also based on generators in the SmartComponent Library framework. So it's calling them based on my naming patterns, confirming me that it created those viewers and the grids, and then it creates a form based on the template that was identified. And after it has created the template, it then updates the generated repository object, and what it does in particular, it sets the title for the window, because a template is actually like a window, but it just has a placeholder title. It updates the page labels on the tab folders, and it sets the foreign fields property on one of the data sources. With the foreign fields data sources, we maintain the parent-child relation between the order and the order line record. And after that, we have this result. We have a working program showing the same fields from the legacy program, same fields in the viewer. The viewer layout is a little bit different because here we are applying it to a responsive layout. And responsive layout, typically the width of the fields are not relevant because it's all floating based on the browser sizes, etc. With our lookup component there, the lookup, if I look at this here, we see we have this magnifying glass there next to the customer number and the customer name field there. I click that, then I get this dialog, which is a component of the framework. And on the page 2, we have the parent-child relations. As the coding agent is able to modify the repository data, and we've seen that in the sample by setting the headers and the form label here, and the foreign fields definition. We can also instruct the AI to shuffle around the fields in the viewers, for instance. We could tell the AI, create me group boxes in the customer or in the order entry viewer, and put the fields into these two group boxes based on categories of fields. So we could be saying, okay, the fields that are item is one category, and the fields that have price and quantity are the other. Because the AI understands the labels of the fields or the field names, it can make sense to that and provide difference there. That's something that we're currently working on. And to be honest, this updating, we're still trying to find the right balance between how much data we give to the LLM. We're currently at a point where everything is possible, but it's too slow. So we are now starting to optimize that before we actually make that available. But in principle, it works. We can tell it where to place the fields and do stuff with that and make all the changes through rule sets that we also then define with the skills. Good. With that, I'm coming to my end. I'd like to invite you to sign up to our newsletter on that website. With that newsletter, we'll keep you up to date to, well, all our activities, new releases, and future webinars like that. In May, we have a lot of Progress User Group and OpenEdge World Tour conferences coming up that we are attending. First week of May, this starts with the German Progress User Group and the OpenEdge World Tour here in Cologne. We're doing a workshop on refactoring using Windsurf there. On the 7th, same week, that's the OpenEdge World Tour in Breda in the Netherlands, together with the Progress User Group. Following week, I'm going to do a short tour through Australia, starting in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. And on the 22nd, back in Europe, there's the Baltics Progress User Group Conference in Tallinn, Estonia. So plenty of occasions to meet us. Because of that, we haven't planned any actual webinars yet for the summer, but we will be doing webinars over the summer. Probably something about AI, maybe new stuff from the SmartComponent Library, but we're also thinking about more classic OpenEdge focused topics. Peter and I feel we're due to do a what's new in ABL with 13.0 or something like that. We are playing with pathway benchmarking webinar with the idea, well, it's beyond the idea already of a pathway benchmarking webinar. Yeah, there'll be stuff coming. And the other thing which I don't want to miss today actually is a sale for tickets of the PAC Challenge conferences, beginning of October in Providence in Rhode Island, and beginning of November in Amsterdam in the Netherlands has started today. So definitely worth signing up and get the early bird tickets while they're still there. And with that, I would turn to questions. Peter Lutz, are there questions?
I'm not seeing any yet so far.
No, chat is empty.
Okay. Anybody else has any questions?
No questions, but a comment, Mike. In one of your demos, it was very instructive to see how the agent or the AI said, the sonar errors were there before I touched the code. It wasn't me. I didn't do it. Which is, very, very programmer-like.
When the AI excuses for it wasn't me, isn't that the equivalent of a programmer saying it works on my PC?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you could say, hey, it wasn't you, but fix it anyway. Good. Well, when there are no questions, then thanks for your time. Thanks for your interest. And yeah, talk to you soon. Let's stay in touch.